The reading this morning is from Proverbs chapter 8, verses 1 to 4, 23 to 31. Wisdom's autobiography. Doesn't wisdom cry out and understanding shout? Atop the heights, along the path, at the crossroads, she takes her stand. By the gate, before the city, at the entrance, she shouts, I cry out to you, people. My voice goes out to all of humanity. I was formed in ancient times, at the beginning, before the earth was. When there were watery depths, I was brought forth. When there were no springs flowing with water. Before the mountains were settled, before the hills, I was brought forth. Before God made the earth and the fields were the first of dry land. I was there when he established the heavens, when he marked out the horizon on the deep sea, when he thickened the clouds above, when he secured the fountains of the deep, when he set a limit for the sea so the water couldn't go beyond his command, when he marked out the earth foundations. I was beside him as a master of crafts. I was having fun, smiling before him all the time, frolicking with his inhabited earth and delighting in the human race.
Thank you, Trish. I love your emphasis on the pronouns as you read that, because it's interesting how the different pronouns introduce the characters. And as you pointed out earlier when we were talking, that's poetry, and it's beautiful poetry. And speaking of poetry, I'm going to begin today by sharing with you a poem. It's called The Spirit Likes to Dress Up by Mary Oliver. The Spirit likes to dress like this: 10 fingers, 10 toes, shoulders, and all the rest. At night, in the black branches. In the morning, in the blue branches of the world. It could float, of course, but it would rather plumb the rough matter. Airy and shapeless thing, it needs the metaphor of the body. Lime and appetite, the oceanic fluids. It needs the body's world, instinct and imagination, and the dark hug of time, sweetness and tangibility, to be understood, to be more than pure light that burns where no one is. So it enters us. In the morning, shines from brute comfort like a stitch of lightning, and at night, lights up in the deep and wondrous drownings of the body, like a star. Now, I like this poem because it liberates us in our understanding of the Spirit. It allows us to imagine a God in a variety of relationships, just as humanity exists in a variety of relationships. And as we come to worship today, following both the flaming tongues flamed by the chaotic winds and the calm breath of the Spirit inspired by Pentecost, we're invited to move from a spirit of celebration to a spirit of contemplation about God's wondrous diversity and presence. We're invited into God's transformative energy, an energy that gives us life, inspires creativity, and protects all of creation. And that's finally the goal of viewing divinity through the lens of a Trinitarian formula. That's why we think about this thing called Trinity. The goal is to better understand and then live into the nature of God. Now, a number of years ago, I was with a search committee for a seminary professor. And in reality, the decision was already made. They were going to hire from within. But the rules required that they interview at least one other candidate, which is where the speaker, whom was interviewing for the position enters the story today. Now, I don't remember his name all these years later, but I remember some of what he said. He likened the Trinity to a fire in a fireplace. Now, of course, you've all heard these same kind of comparisons before. The Trinity is like ice, water, and steam, three forms but the same substance. The Trinity is like an apple, the peel, the flesh, and the core. And the one that I actually find most helpful is the Trinity viewed as relationship. And it goes like this. I have a different relationship with Manny than I do with Becky. And I have still a different relationship with my parents. To Manny, I'm a father. To Becky, I'm her partner. To my parents, I'm their child. I'm still Phil. I'm always Phil. But I'm Phil in three unique relationships. But, as was very rudely pointed out by a renowned Trinitarian theologian who was also on the search committee, all of these examples fall short of the true nature of the Trinity. But that being said, I think our guest pastor was onto something. He had a good one. He invited us to think about how to build a fire on a cold morning. If you place the logs too close together, he said, the fire won't ignite because of a lack of oxygen. And if you put the logs too far apart, they won't take off either because the logs have to touch in order to burn. And he said that the Trinity is like that. The Trinity is the perfect balance between wood, oxygen, and flame. All three are necessary. All three must be touching. All three work in concert with each other. All three move and have being and substance within and around all of creation. So a Trinitarian understanding of God then holds that these three relationships of God are indivisible, inseparable. The three create a whole, ever moving, ever swirling in perfect harmony, in which Richard Rohr so beautifully defines as the divine dance. Now, in his book of that same name, Father Rohr says this: Trinity leads you into a world of mystery and humility, where you cannot understand, you can only experience. You cannot understand, you can only experience. So if we finally cannot understand fully the concept of the Trinity, where does that leave us? Well, perhaps the text that we have before us today from Proverbs 8 might help us out here a bit. Proverbs speaks of Sophia, or divine wisdom, as God's creative companion. Now, contextually, I think it's important to understand that Proverbs 8 is the predecessor to the prologue of John's Gospel and its vision of God's creative works, God's creative word, God's logos. You remember the prologue to John? In beginningness, there was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. And in verse 14, it says the Word became flesh and dwelled among them. So logos, divine logic, to be literal, is interconnected with, indistinguishable from, divine wisdom. A logic, a wisdom that's in every particle of the universe, including you and I. Now, the late Archbishop Desmond Tutu spoke of God as fellowship and the Trinity as the community of God. Maybe Tutu's wisdom could serve us well here. Maybe we could let go of all the theological jargon for a moment. Maybe we could let go of all those cutesy little comparisons and think about God. Think about the world. Think about humanity itself as community. Because if we, at least in some small way, begin to move in harmony with all of creation, if we could, at least in some small way, begin to see people as one community of God's beloved people, perhaps then things might begin to change. And dare I say, change for the better. May it be so. Amen.
Amen.